All right, thank you. I'm really excited to be here to talk about data storytelling. So many of you, as you go about your daily work and stuff, you probably are surrounded by lots of numbers, lots of data. And there's a quote by an expert in data visualization named Stephen Few. And he said, numbers have an important story to tell. They rely on you to give them a clear and convincing voice. And so today I'm going to talk about how you can tell the story of your numbers and also why that's important. You know, whether you're a marketer or an analyst, it's very important to be able to tell a story with the data. So today, when we have data, you know, as an analyst or as a marketer, we come to one of these, a business decision maker, a key stakeholder who we have two options. We can inform them of what the data is saying, or we can tell them a story. And so I want to talk about why it's important. I mean, informing people is important, but telling a story can be so much more powerful. So stories beat statistics. So there was a study that they did where they asked students to take a topic and convince the other students in the classroom about their topic. And at the end of all of the students presenting, they found that only 5% of the students in the crowd could remember one of the statistics that the students used. But 63% of them could actually remember the story that was shared. And so stories are memorable. That's the first point. Second point, they're also more persuasive. So there was a study done at a university where they had students come in and they had two options. One was they basically gave them infographics. They gave them a bunch of data on a charity that they wanted to have the students, at the end of their session, they gave them $5 as payment for listening to their data. And the students could then donate some amount of money to the charity. So they had one example where it was infographics and data. The other one is they took an example of one of a girl that would benefit from this, she's a poor girl in an African country, and they told her story and included, data as part of that story. But the main focus was the story. And so they found at the end of this that the students would donate more money when there was a story. So it was $2.38 compared to when there was just data. It was $1.43. So when we share a story, it's more persuasive with our audiences. So I shared this in the main stage here, and this is the path to value. And one of the key things that I'm going to talk about is moving from the analysis to influencing a decision. That's a key thing that we need to do. We have an insight, and we want to help somebody make a decision because that's the only way we can actually drive any value. If somebody makes a decision and actually takes action on our insight, then we can actually change things. We can actually make a difference at our company. So I like to think, or I used to think as a former analyst, I like to think that logic or reason would be what influences a decision. However, neuroscientists have actually done a lot of research on this, and they've found that emotion is actually the more influential factor on a business decision. So they actually did a study, a neuroscientist, he was working with a lot of people who had brain trauma to areas of their brain that controlled emotion. And so these people basically didn't have emotion. They would make decisions without emotion. And what he discovered was interesting is that these individuals, when they went to make a basic decision about, where should we go for lunch? If you wanted to have a lunch meeting with one of these patients, he would ask them, well, where should we go? And then they would be like, oh, well, maybe we could go to that Italian place, but no, wait a second, there's long lineups there. And then they go, well, maybe we could go to this Greek place. Oh, but then last time, they don't have a lot of organic food. And so they would go back and forth, and it would take them a long time to make a basic decision, even choosing what day they should schedule their next appointment with this professor. So they would say, well, I don't know if it should be Wednesday or Thursday. So simple decisions that they had to make became very difficult for these individuals because they didn't have that emotional part of their brain to help them make a decision. And so this professor said, feelings are not just the shady side of reason, but they help us to reach decisions as well. So why data stories? Why are they more effective? Well, they're actually that bridge between the logic side of communicating information to the emotional side. That's how we, as we're sharing information, as we're telling data stories, we can bridge and get the best of both of these worlds. And so one of the things we say here is we hear statistics, but we feel stories. So when the neuroscientists actually looked at the brain of somebody who's listening to data, there's two parts of their brain that would light up. These are associated with hearing. However, when somebody shared a story, then all parts of that brain would light up because they're not only hearing, but they're feeling what you're telling them. And so that can be really powerful. So if we look at how we as human beings have stories in our lives, we are surrounded by stories. We read books and magazines, we watch TV, we go to the movies, we play video games where we become part of the story. When we interact with our colleagues at work, we share stories with them. If we're with our children, we may train them with sharing experiences and stories. When we go to sleep at night, our brain does not shut down. It wants more stories. We have dreams. And then when we return to work and we become distracted, we even sometimes daydream, and then we think of more stories. We are wired for stories. And so as data storytellers, we can take advantage of this thing that human beings need, their need for stories. So there's another study that some scientists did, and they found that when we approach somebody with data or facts or information, something happens. The shields come. It's like Star Trek. The shields come up, and we're defensive. We're critical. We're skeptical. We don't know where this is coming from. However, they noticed a different effect when people actually came with a story. So what they said is that people actually enter into what's called a story listening trance. And the intellectual guard that people have actually is lowered. And so it's a great vehicle for us to share information with other people in a way that they're going to listen to and hopefully remember, and it's more persuasive to drive action, which is really what we're trying to do. So I'm going to insert another domino here. So I had my path to value, but I think the data story is really important, that we connect the insight with the decision making. And so that is really critical for us to drive value. So there's 3 keys to data storytelling. We have data, we have narrative, and we have visuals. And if I look at the intersection of just 2 of these, if we look at narrative with data, when we take the data and we explain it to somebody, we're helping them to understand it, not just hear it, but understand it. If we combine and look at the visuals with the data, when we combine visuals with the data, we can see things that we wouldn't have seen before. The visualizations help us to see things that were hidden if it was just in a data table. But now if we see a visualization, either a line chart or a bar chart or some kind of visualization, all of a sudden we can see things that would have been invisible before. And also, if you think of the movies and the entertainment that we absorb, when we have that visual with the narrative, that engages us. We show more interest. And so when we combine all three of these things together, this is how we influence change through data stories. The combination of all three of these factors help us to really drive change in action at our organization. So I'm going to focus on two areas. Now I'm going to assume that you know how to find an insight. I'm not going to teach you how to do analysis. So you're going to have an insight that you want to share within your organization or with your team or with your coworker or with your boss or somebody. And I'm going to talk about how you can introduce narrative and how you can use visuals to complement the insight that you've found. So the first area I'm going to focus on is narrative. And I'm going to give you 3 tips in this area. So I'm going to talk about know your audience. I'm going to structure how to structure your analysis findings as a story, and then how to insert heroes into your data story. So the first thing is, if I was telling a story to one of my children, I would probably tell it very differently than I would maybe my coworker. Same story, but very different. And so the audience actually affects or changes how we tell the story. And so that's the first place I want to start. So my question is, how well do you know your audience? And there's a number of factors or considerations that we can look at, and I'll share 6 of them with you. So the first thing is, do we understand their key business goals and objectives? They won't, if I come to them with a story that's very compelling, but it's about things that they don't care about, I'm wasting their time and I'm wasting my time. So I, as an analyst, as a data storyteller, I need to find the audience that cares about my story. Or if I have the audience, I have to know what's important to them and what are the key business goals or objectives that they care about. I want my data story to be relevant. The next thing is, I need to anticipate what questions or things that are top of mind for the audience. So are there specific questions or needs that they have that I will need to address and make sure that I cover in my story? How familiar is the audience with the topic? Do they have the full background on the story? Many times they don't. And so in those cases where they're less familiar with the topic that I'm sharing the data story on, then I need to provide more context. I need to be careful about, maybe I might need to explain it as a concept and teach them a little bit about the topic before I share my insight. How data savvy is the audience? If the audience is less data savvy, I might need to reduce the amount of detail that I show. And I might need to be careful about the jargon or technical words that I use, because they won't understand them or it might go over their head. What's the seniority level of the audience that I'm sharing the data story to? The more senior the level, the audience, the more likely that they're going to have less time to hear a story. And so I might have to provide a summary of my findings and then seek permission to then tell a story to them. And then lastly is the delivery method. So sometimes I get the opportunity to actually present in person, and that's great. But if I'm not able to present in person, and many times it's the case where we share information through a report or email it or put it on a portal, and I'm not able to be there. I'm not able to be narrating that data. And so I have to annotate it. I have to put my voice, text, to represent and help them interpret the data correctly. So those are 6 considerations for your audience. Now, how to structure a data story. So as I was researching on stories, I found a man named Gustav Freytag. And he is a German playwright. And he studied a lot of Greek tragedies and Shakespearean plays. And he found that they all had a similar pattern. And so what this pattern is, a lot of the times when we talk about stories, we say they have a beginning, middle, and end. I don't think that's as helpful. But what he did is if we take, Harry Potter, many of us know Harry Potter. And you take any kind of story, a lot of the times they fit this exact arc. So let me take you through it. So first we're introduced to the character. So we're introduced to Harry Potter. He's an orphan boy. He lives under the stairs at his aunt and uncle's house. That's how we meet him. And then one day he goes to the zoo and he hears a snake talk to him. So there's an inciting action that happens. Something changes in the environment of this character. And then obviously, there's lots of action that happens to Harry Potter or the main character. They go through a series of events, reaching a climax. And this climax is where Harry Potter, meets Voldemort and fights Voldemort. And then after we have falling action, we have a resolution. Harry Potter now knows he's a wizard, and he's happy to have friends at Hogwarts. And through this process, the person that we meet at the beginning has changed. The character has changed through this process. So how can we apply this to data? This sounds nice for stories and books. How does it apply to data? So let me take that same story arc and I'll convert it into how it works for stories, for data stories. So first we have to have a setup. So here we're going to provide background on the current situation. We're going to introduce the characters. Maybe we have people in our data that we want to share as part of this, and I'll talk about that later. And then we have the hook. And the hook is really, we might say this is how our marketing campaigns were performing before, and then all of a sudden we had a spike, a big increase in conversion or a big increase in traffic. Something happened. And then we go through a process of what I call rising insights. So we're taking the onion and we're peeling a layer off. We're showing more and more, leading all the way up to our aha moment. And that's our key insight, our major finding that we want to share with our stakeholders or the team that we're sharing the information with. And this could be multiple steps. It depends on how complex it is. It might be very simple, where we just go from the hook to the aha moment, or, as I showed earlier, we might have multiple steps. But our job is not done. We don't just stop there at the aha moment. We have to help the organization to act on it, right? So what we have to do is provide further analysis of solution. So we have this opportunity or we have this problem. What do we do about it? And so we help the audience to say, well, here are your options. And we've done further analysis to help them make the best decision possible. And our audience, hopefully, by us sharing this, whether or not they take action on this problem or opportunity, they will at least have more knowledge. Hopefully they've learned something from what we've shared. So let me walk you through an example. So I have here a clothing retailer. And I've done some analysis on the data, and I found an interesting thing. And I'm starting with my aha, my biggest finding. And I found that there's some men's boots, Timberland boots, that are a hot seller. For some reason, they're selling like crazy. They're very popular. And I've done the analysis to see that if we promote these boots on our site more, we'll generate 650 million Korean won in additional revenue, which is great. So now this is my aha moment. Now I have to go to the beginning. Where am I going to start my story? Well, I'm going to start my story by looking for the hook. And my hook is that first kind of thing that is different in the environment. So here we see that revenue increased year over year 17%. That's interesting. I think that'll get the interest of my audience. And now what I want to do is connect that to my aha moment. So there's a couple of data points I want to share in there where I noticed that the revenue for the men's category is up 56% year over year. And within the men's category, the men's footwear is up 87%. And so I have my connection. These are my rising insights here. And the last step, and very important as well, is to now say, okay, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to address this? Well, I've looked at options for how do we take advantage of this opportunity. I think that we should do, based on my analysis, email promotion and internal search results should be where we focus to seize this opportunity. And I've also looked at what we don't want to do. We don't want to change our homepage hero ads, and cross-selling won't be a good recommendation for this. And so here you can see how I form the story based on my analysis. So data by itself can be kind of cold, distant, and impersonal. And when you're presenting data, we want to be careful that we don't do that mistake. We want to make it personal. We want to make it appealing to people. How do we do that? Well, we need to humanize our insights. And so the question I have for you when you're building an analysis story, who is your hero? Is there a hero that you can insert into your data story that people can relate to, that they care about? In marketing, probably one of the people or group of people that marketers care the most about is customers. So a segment of my customers, if I can make that segment come alive, all of a sudden, I think I'm going to have a more engaged audience. Luckily, in marketing, if we were analyzing factory data or something like that, we're talking about machines. But in our case with marketing, most of the time we're talking about people. And so the people, the heroes that we need for our data stories are within the data that we're already collecting. We just need to bring them out and shine a spotlight on them. So how do we do that? So the first step is to look at your data and say, okay, where are the people, where are the segments that are going to matter to my story? Okay, and I want to pick one that's going to really resonate with my audience. And I'm going to build out a rich data-driven profile of this hero. So I already know what I'm focusing on, but I want to add some additional detail. So when are they coming to the website? What content are they looking at? Where are they from? What other products are they purchasing? What's their favorite content? All these kinds of things can help to build out somebody that is interesting and relatable for our audience. Next, I like to give this person or this segment, this person that represents a segment, give them a face. And so sometimes I'll turn to stock photography to make this person come alive. And so here I have a collection of different gestures by the same person, but I can tell a story with the stock photography. The other thing I can do is I want to give the hero a voice. And so if I can give them a voice, I can take social data, I can take survey data, qualitative data, and add that to my analysis, to my story, and help give these people a voice. And the last thing is I want to take my audience through and put them in the shoes of the customer. If there's a problem with my website, if there's a problem with my app, I want to take them and help these content marketers to understand this is how our customers feel it. This is the problem they run into when they come to our website. And help, they already know the content, but they don't know it from the perspective of the customer. And so these are steps that you can take to add a character to your data story. So now I've kind of talked about some tips for narrative. Now I want to transition over to visuals. And I talk about 6 different areas. And a lot of this is going to focus around something that I think we want to be careful with our audience, which is we don't want to overwhelm our audience. And so if we look at the different kinds of memory that we have sensory memory, we have working memory, and we have long-term memory. And what happens is a lot of times, when we're sharing analysis, the working memory is processing. and it can become overloaded if we're not careful. And so we want to help our audience to process as much of that information and get it into the long-term memory so they can use it and retain it. So if we look, there's a theory called cognitive load theory. And there's 3 kinds of load that we place on this working memory. So one is intrinsic load, another is extraneous load, and then germane load. So one of these loads is neutral. It's not good or bad. One of them is bad, and one of them is good. Let me give you an example, kind of help to differentiate them. So for intrinsic, this is really about the complexity of the topic that we're talking about. So I could teach you how to fold a paper airplane. Or I could be teaching you how to pilot an airliner. Those topics are very different in complexity. I can't change the complexity, but I can do the best I can to manage the complexity of the topic. So next, if I were to teach you how to fold a paper airplane, I would probably do this. But what happens is a lot of the times when we're sharing data, we do this instead. And so we have a lot of extra things that get in the way of our communication. And so what we want to do is minimize the extraneous information that we provide to people. And then lastly, the germane. And so this is where we want people to get hands-on and actually experience and understand the data. And usually when you have germane learning, that's where they're actually really going to retain the information that we're sharing. And so obviously we can't have people do analysis, but we can have them activate their brains and hopefully use and consume that information in a way that's more effective. And so that we want to maximize that as much as possible. So I'm going to share the 6 tips. I have 1 that's based on the intrinsic, 3 that are based on the extraneous, and then the last 2 are based on the germane. So the first one is, a lot of times we have a lot of data when we're sharing it. We share charts, data visualizations. And one technique that I found is really effective is to stagger or stage the way we introduce information. So in this chart here, I'm talking about 3 different rates. And I've only revealed 1 rate, which is at the top of the funnel. Now I'm going to introduce the second rate, where somebody goes from starting the form to actually completing the form. And then the last rate, which is actually them becoming a sale after they've completed the form. And so I introduced each of those one by one. I didn't overwhelm you with all of the data. And I can even add commentary as well to highlight a particular area of the chart. But again, I'm not doing that all at once. I'm bringing it in bit by bit. And it's a part of that working memory and that cognitive load. We want to manage the complexity. And I can manage the complexity by breaking it up and staging it for my audience. So how do you do this? So if you're in Excel, you've created your chart, you select the entire chart, and you create a copy. Okay, and then you paste special into PowerPoint as a picture, and you want to save it as a Windows meta file. Then you go to ungroup the chart. And when you ungroup the chart, you're going to be prompted to whether you want to convert it into a Microsoft drawing object. And that's when you say yes. And when you do that, now you have the chart is broken up into different components, which you can now animate. Now this works great for all of these charts, except for the bar and column. The bar and column, if you just do those steps and you ungroup it, you get a bitmap where all of the bars are part of the same image. You can't do anything with it. However, there is a small workaround. If you put a dark outline around each of these boxes and then ungroup, it'll actually treat them as separate elements. So there is a workaround. But using this staging of the content will help you to communicate and manage the complexity of your analysis. Now, choosing the right visualization is really critical. They did a study in the mid-'80s where they asked people to look at comparisons. And they asked them to look at different visualizations to see which were most effective. Some were highly accurate, and those are on the left side. So those are 2D position along a common aligned scale, or even common but on unaligned scales. It was easy for people, the most easiest for people to make comparisons with those kinds of visualizations. And then as we move from left to right, those on the left are more accurate and easier for us as human beings. But as we get more and more over to the right, they're really only good for general kind of generic comparisons. And so my question for you in the audience is, where does a pie chart sit on this scale? It's a combination of area and angle, which are right in the middle. And that might explain why pie charts kind of struggle sometimes to convey good comparisons. So let me give you an example here. Here I have a beautiful pie chart. Okay? We have different social media traffic to our site. So which one of these pie slices is the biggest? It's kind of tricky, you know? And what we have to do a lot of the times with pie charts is we have to label them with the numbers to help them explain. And that seems self-defeating. Why should we have to label it so it works? That's kind of defeats the purpose of the visualization if we have to do that. However, if we do it with a bar chart, I don't even have to add the actual numbers. I can add them, but you don't need them to see which one is more effective. So this is much better. So part of what when we're telling data stories is we need to make sure that we are using the right visualizations. Now, ditching the defaults. This is a quick little exercise. When you're using Excel or any kind of data visualization tool, they have a number of defaults. And so I'm going to quickly go through this. You've probably seen this kind of, when you go into Excel, create a visualizations like this. This is exactly what you've seen. You've probably seen this 1,000 times. So we're going to fix it up. We're going to clean it up. We're going to get rid of the unnecessary legend. Okay, we're going to fix this horizontal date axis at the bottom. We have the dollar value on the left there. We don't need it repeated multiple times. In fact, we don't even need the zeros, that many zeros there. Let's clean that up. Remove some of that chart junk, as we call it. We also have the padding on either side of the line chart. When you have the option to do between tick marks or on the tick marks. And if we change it to on the tick marks, it reduces some of that extra padding. We also have other tick marks and lines that we don't need. We can remove those. We can lighten the grid lines, remove those. And we can introduce our own corporate font. We can give it a more meaningful title. So here we have revenue peaking in June 2014. And then we can even pull out some of those dots and make them a little bit more easier for people to see. We can even highlight a key data point on the chart. And so here we've gone from this to this on the right. And just by taking those steps, we're able to help the data to communicate a little bit better. So one of the things that we do to ourselves is sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot. We are our own worst enemy. We're trying to share the signal of the data, but we keep a lot of noise in the data by our own mistakes. And so we can make this mistake here. This is actually a presentation that somebody presented to me about a year ago. Very similar data. Where do I look? What am I looking at? Oh, it's hard. So really, a best practice is to have one visualization per slide. So if I take that same data and I share it one by one, much different experience. I can even use the content staging to highlight what I want. But that is easier for people to digest. Again, we're trying not to overload our audience's brains. So there was a talk that was given by Andrew Stanton. He's very famous for creating a lot of the Pixar movies. And he made a great point. He talked about the unifying theory of 2 + 2. And I really like this theory here, that when we're sharing data, we don't want to do the 4. We want to share 2 + 2. And why do we want to do that? It's because we want our audience to almost perform a mini analysis in their heads. We want them to connect the dots for themselves. We don't want to feed it to them directly. We want them to pick up the spoon and make that jump themselves. And they engage. So let me give you an example of this. So here we have a key stakeholder. He's just sat through our presentation for the last 10 slides. He is not nearsighted. He can actually see that data, but that's what his brain is thinking right now because he's lost interest. So how can we change that? So I'm going to shake it up by saying, okay, here's our data for January 2014. What do you think happened a year later in 2015? So people say, oh, well, I think more people are interested in politics and business, and so I think that we're going to see a jump in traffic there, and then probably the world will decrease. So they'll start to process the data in their heads. And then we do the reveal, and we show, oh, here's what happened. And then people will, oh, that's what I expected, or that's not what I expected, in a discussion or something happens. So that's a different approach than just giving the data. Here's another approach that I could do. So here I'm providing all of the data this time, but I'm asking the audience to do the analysis. What do you see here that stands out to you? And so they'll start to look at that and think, oh, well, that's kind of surprising this happened. And then I could bring in the actual analysis and say, here's what I found. Travel and health. These are two key life cycle metrics or segments that we should be interested in, and they grew 73% and 71%. They either saw that for themselves, and we can show how smart they are, or it would be unexpected and a surprise to them that it was right in front of their face and they didn't see it. Again, we're activating their minds, 2 + 2 instead of 4. And then the last one I want to share with you is based on, let's make the data more relatable. And so the New York Times, they did a series of videos on different Olympic events. And they did this great video on Bob Beamon. And he is a record holder for the long jump at the Olympic event in 1968. And they shared the distance that he jumped, which is 29 feet, 2.5 inches. Now, I grew up in Canada, so, feet didn't, process as much as the metric system, but that feels like a long distance, but, I don't know exactly. Well, what they did in the video is they said, it's the same distance as somebody jumping from the back of a basketball court past the 3-point line. And when they relate it to something, even though I'm not a basketball player, I've seen a basketball court, I go, oh my gosh, that's really far. And so we can do the same thing with our data. Let's make it relatable. So here I have, this is based on a friend. He was working with a company and he was a consultant. He was analyzing their paid search. And they had a number of keywords that would not convert at all. Never, ever. Every month would not convert. And so he said, you know what? If we multiply this out for every month of the year, you are wasting 120 million Korean won every year. Do you know what you could do with that? You could hire 2 really smart analysts to do more analysis like what I'm doing. And so making it relatable like that, oh my gosh, we should stop wasting this money and we should be, I don't know if they invested in the people, but it put it in perspective. Another thing we can do here, a lot of the times maybe we're sharing data like this with a scatter plot and we have it labeled. But what if we take it and put the product right next to what we're highlighting here? Simple examples like this. This is based on when I presented with somebody from Nike. He does a lot of this. He actually takes the product and puts it into the data visualizations because it helps the product managers to see their product and make a connection. Makes the data relatable. And so these tips I hope were helpful. Data storytelling is really important, and I hope that great stories happen to those who can tell them. And if you prepare yourself to be a data storyteller, you will share all kinds of great data stories. Thank you.